Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the 5th October meeting of the Community Infrastructure Levy Steering Group. My name is Councillor Jonathan Vinehall, Chairman of the CIL Steering Group. This meeting is being held remotely and is being live streamed via YouTube, and the recording of it will be available afterwards on the website. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones on silent if they have one near them, leave their cameras on for the steering group members only, and mute your microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and saves bandwidth to prevent loss of connection. I'll first do a roll call to check all members who are expected to attend are present. As I say your name, please turn on your microphone and confirm you are connected. Councillor Kevin Dixon.
Present.
Councillor Doug Oliver.
Present.
Councillor Sue Prochak.
Present.
And I am also present. Other members joining us today, we have Councillor Chris Madeley, and officers joining us today are Tim Hickling, who's the Head of Service Strategy and Planning, Nicola Waters, who's the Planning Policy Manager, Scott Lavicar, who's the Principal CIL Officer, and Robert Venard, Assistant Director. There are two technical staff in the meeting to operate the live broadcast and to be on hand if there are any technical difficulties, and our Democratic Services Officer today, Julie Holland. Members of the steering group will be making the decisions today by a named vote, and Julie will call out each member's name in turn, and they will answer either for or against or abstain. And just remind you to turn your microphone on before voting and turn it off again. Because of the new format, members are encouraged to make their comments succinct and pertinent to ensure the smooth running of the meeting. Those members who wish to speak, please indicate by typing your surname only in the chat facility. That is a persistent facility, can't be deleted, so please ensure that anything written in there is appropriate. Otherwise, it could be a code of conduct matter arising. You may wish to also interject if you wish to respond to a member's question. I'll ask members who have asked questions if they wish to come back after receiving a response, so there's no need to type your name again in the chat facility. It's required that all members will have read the paperwork published on the website, and the members are reminded not to press the leave meeting if you do leave the room. Just turn off your camera and microphone. Please be aware that there can be a time delay of around 5 seconds whilst members appear on screen, and I will commence by introducing each item on the agenda as listed. Today, I did want to consider item 8 before we do item 5, and when we get to that, I'll just ask if anyone has any objections. So, continuing on, item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Julie, could you give us the apologies for absence?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Bayliss.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we'll move to declarations now. Item 2, declarations of interest. Councillor Prochak.
Yes, just that a personal one, because I chair the community grants panel.
Good. All right. Well, when that comes along, if you could redeclare as well, thank you. On that note, we're going to move to the minutes of the last meeting of the 24th of July. We will do the matters arising. Before we do the matters arising, does anyone have any issues with the minutes of the last meeting? Okay, we'll just go through the matters arising and then accept those minutes if you're happy. There are 4 or 5 actions on the minutes. The first one was to send a link to the instalment policy to members present at the meeting, and I believe that was sent out by Nicola Waters. So thank you very much for that. We have that. The second was to provide information on the amount of new homes bonus lost as a result of recent developments approved on appeal, and I think Scott Lavicar was going to provide that information. Scott, did you have that?
Yes, Chairman. Just to say that the figure is £819,664.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Did anyone want to make a comment on that? No, we can hold that for later. Good. The third action was to verify whether the higher CIL payment, that's the 25% for made neighbourhood plans, related to the planning application that received planning permission after neighbourhood plans were made, or those schemes which commenced development after a neighbourhood plan was made. Nicola, could you update on that?
Yes, so
need to refer to paragraph 145 of the CIL section of the planning practice guidance, and that sets out what charging authority, so in that instance that's Rother District Council, should pass on in terms of CIL receipts to parish councils. So it sets out that where development which has received planning permission is also within an area which has a neighbourhood development plan in place, or the development was granted planning permission by a neighbourhood development order, the charging authority, Rother District Council, must pass 25% of the relevant CIL receipts to the parish council for that area. And for this to apply, the neighbourhood plan must have been made before a relevant planning permission first permits the development. So therefore, the planning permission must have been granted after the plan's been made. So that's set out in paragraph 145 of the CIL section of the PPG.
That's very good to clarify. That's quite an important point. So CIL, the higher CIL only applies if the planning permission was given, the decision notice was made after the plan was made.
That's correct.
Action 4, to verify whether the 72-bed care home at Rosewood Park was CIL liable or not. This falls to you as well.
Okay, yeah, we've checked the records for the Rosewood Park application, and the 72-bed care home was not CIL liable.
Okay, is that because of the timing of when the permission was given, or because it's not liable because it's a care home?
It's not liable, that development, because it's a care home.
Okay, all right. Everyone happy with that response? I can't remember who asked it. I think it might have been Sue. Okay, so that moves us on to the next item, which is item 4. Sorry, if I could just, before I go on, is everyone happy to accept those minutes?
Yeah. Yes.
Do we need to take a vote on that, Julie?
No, because there's no significant changes or anything, we don't need to worry about doing a vote. So as long as everybody's happy with them, that's fine.
All right, thank you very much. That takes us on to the next item, which is the background to the infrastructure funding statement. I'll hand over, I think, to Nicola on this, as she is the best to explain. And there's just a little tweak in the recommendation too, I believe.
Actually, I'm going to pass that item to Scott to present on this item.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll just need to correct the recommendation in the draft, in the report, in that it will be presented to the 2nd of November CIL steering group meeting, and not the 5th of October, which is today. This is just to give members a bit of background to the requirements of producing an infrastructure funding statement, not to present the draft infrastructure funding statement, which, if you're okay with, I'll refer to as IFS for the remainder of the report. So the CIL amended regulations came into effect on the 1st of September 2019, and with that came the need to replace the currently adopted 1, 2, 3 list with an infrastructure funding statement. The IFS for this year will be informed by the Council's adopted 2019 Infrastructure Delivery Plan. The IFS must set out the following: details of CIL expenditure for the previous financial year, so in this case 2019-20 year, details of Section 106 obligations relating to the previous financial year, and finally details of infrastructure projects that the Council plans to fund or may fund wholly or partly by the levy. And it's important to note that this excludes local CIL, which is passed to towns and parish councils in Rother, either 15% or 25% if there is a neighbourhood plan in place. I will be preparing the Council's IFS, which will be presented to the next steering group meeting on the 2nd of November in order to meet the 31st of December deadline, which will be a deadline every year going forward after this year. Links to the Council's currently adopted 1, 2, 3 list, together with the infrastructure delivery plan and CIL regulations, are included within the report or can be found on our website. Thank you.
All right, so does anyone have any questions on this? This is basically just a report we have to do to government.
That's right, Chairman, yes.
All right. Well, if nobody has any questions on it, do we need to take a vote on this, Julie?
Yes, we should do, really, yes.
There you go. Yes, Councillor Project.
Just before we take the vote, we don't have to report what the parishes are doing, do we? We just have to report that money has been transferred to the parishes.
That's right, Councillor. Yes, we need to report on how much money has been handed to the parishes, towns and parishes, but it's for the parish and towns it's their requirement to report on what the money's been spent on.
So they have a requirement as well?
Yes.
I'm aware of that.
Well, yes, they are. If I could take that up, I think Nicola sent out to the parishes earlier this year a reminder that they have to do that, and they have to. I think they have to provide it to us, put it on our website or put it on their own website. But it's really up to them to do that. Is that correct, Nicola?
Okay.
Yes, that is correct. So last year I sent a reminder out to the parishes which had received funds, the local or neighbourhood portion of SIL, a number of which responded to that, and we've got the ones that provided the response. They're published on our website, and that is one of the requirements, that when the money is transferred, they have to report what they've received, and then if they've spent it, what they've spent it on. So we'll send out a reminder this year to remind those which have received money about that requirement also.
And could I just follow up with a question, Joan? Is this the last we will see of the 1, 2, 3 list?
I think Nicola can give a formal answer on that.
Yes, so the infrastructure funding statement will replace the regulation 1, 2, 3 list. So when we publish that at the end of the year, we're no longer required to have that list published anymore. It's effectively defunct.
Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's probably appropriate I reveal at this stage a declaration of interest. My wife is parish clerk for Breed Parish Council, and involved in some of this that we've been talking about. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. On that basis, I should probably declare an interest that I'm the chairman of Silscombe Parish Council. I don't think it has a particular impact, but just to be absolutely clear, or just to be transparent. Were you happy with that response, Councillor Project?
Sorry, Chairman, I've asked my questions.
Oh, good. All right, that's fine. That's very good.
My only comment is that we, in the parishes, we weren't happy with the 1, 2, 3 list, as you know. So it's quite nice to know that that's gone.
Yes, yeah, so I think the statement coming forward, I think will, because we're sort of in between, we'll just deal with the reference to the current list as it stands, and then next year's report will deal with whatever comes out of the steering group and is approved. So it won't make much difference in this particular. But yes, you're absolutely right. So it was a slightly problematic list in a various number of ways. So if we could take a vote on that, Julie.
Okay, members, so this is to approve that the draft IFS will go to the next meeting. So I need you to answer for, against or abstain. So Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Oliver.
For.
Councillor Projak.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
So that's unanimous.
And now, if nobody has any objection, I was going to bring item 8 forward, because what is discussed in item 8 has an impact on item 5. Does anyone have any issue with dealing with item 8, which is the overview of the community infrastructure levy, and also has a report on what the other adjacent authorities are doing or have been doing?
Happy to do that.
All right. Okay, so if I'm not sure who's covering this item, Tim?
That's me, Chairman. Scott.
Oh, Scott, okay, go for it.
Thank you. So at present, Rother District Council, Wealdon District Council and both Eastbourne and Lewes councils are currently operating SIL in East Sussex. Hastings Borough Council do not operate SIL and rely solely on Section 106 agreements and their subsequent contributions. And Brighton and Hove City Council is to commence with SIL today, on the 5th of October. The table attached at Appendix A illustrates the different operating procedures at the 4 local councils in East Sussex, comparing a number of key elements of SIL and how strategic SIL funding is allocated towards infrastructure projects, and I have summarised the key points in paragraph 3. With regard to the council's adopted instalment policy, the amended SIL regulations has given charging authorities, i.e. local councils, discretion for a limited period to defer SIL payments for small and medium-sized developers without having to impose additional costs on them. A SIL payment must therefore be due during the material period. Now, the material period is the period starting on the 22nd of July 2020, when the regulations came into force, and ending at midnight on the 31st of July 2021. So members' views are sought as to whether amendments should be made to the ROTHA instalment policy to ease the financial impact on developers in order to potentially stimulate housing delivery in the district. In line with the regulations, officers have published a SIL deferral request application form, which is available on our website. It is worth pointing out that to date, there has only been one form submitted for a deferral. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. So there are a couple of items here. The main question is whether we should consider amending the instalment policy. Scott, I think you were going to prepare a comparison of the instalment policies from other authorities, weren't you? Do you have that available or not?
Yes, Chairman. I didn't have it loaded. Let me load it up now.
If you could share that. So this is a comparison of our instalment policies to those of those neighbouring authorities. So that's the key here. One of the reasons I wanted to also bring this item forward is it deals with how decisions are made by our other neighbouring authorities. Basically, the ROTHA authority is the only one where the decisions on SIL were made by a panel of RDC officers only. In Wealden, Eastbourne and Lewis, they generally go to either the cabinet or to the full council, depending. And I think that's quite an important point to note, because that has an impact when we discuss item 5. How are you getting on there, Scott, sharing that?
Like me to share it now, Chairman? Okay.
Yeah, we're waiting for that. This looks like it's coming up. Good. Okay. You want to just walk us through that?
Yep. So essentially, the second column shows the 60 days of commencement where 100% is payable, and obviously the threshold at which that applies. So you'll see that it's the same for Rotherham and Lewis. Wealden, it's with the £500,000 threshold is within 30 days. And Eastbourne, I know Eastbourne are currently looking at amending their instalment policy, but they haven't implemented it yet. And you'll see on the third column, the instalments shows that again the different thresholds and when the instalments are payable within. So you'll see there are different instalment policies. Different timescales for the different thresholds, as per the third column.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions on this? So we've had one application for deferral. Can you give us any detail on that?
I don't have the information to hand, Chairman. I can see if I can find it in the inbox. Let me just check.
While Scott is looking for that, Councillor Dixon, did you have a comment or question?
Well, I was just simply going to ask, what evidence have we got that this is causing problems for existing applications, and do we need to worry?
Who would like to respond to that?
Well, we've only had one application for deferral, which I know that Scott is looking up at the moment. We've had a couple of telephone inquiries about whether we were looking into amending our instalment policy to make it more favourable to encourage starts on site. So we haven't had, as far as I understand, any written requests, but there have been telephone conversations asking about whether that's something that we would consider to allow them to bring sites forward. But that was prior to the change in the regulations to allow for deferral, which only came in quite recently. The PPG was updated a couple of months ago to encourage local authorities to change their instalment policies to make it more attractive to incentivise small and medium house builders to start on sites, particularly to encourage residential development. So that change is now highlighted in the PPG to make it clear that that's within a local authority's gift to amend their instalment policy. There's no examination process or anything to do that, and if that's something they wish to do in order to incentivise development to come forward at a more increased rate, that's something that we're able to do. But we've only had, as I say, a number of telephone inquiries on that.
Okay.
Just to say, Chairman, we have received supporting documentation with the application form. I don't know how much I can disclose in public of the detail, but they have sent holding accounts with their submitted application. And the key thing to note here that, as the regulations state, that it has to be less, anything over 45 million would mean they wouldn't be liable for deferment. So I mean that doesn't really exclude, that wouldn't really exclude many developers.
All right. And Nicola, what are your thoughts on this?
I believe there is a case to be made that perhaps if we amend our instalment policy, it might show that we could, that we are looking at ways to stimulate development within the district. But on the counter side, and we'll be covering it later on in the agenda, is that through the government consultation on the white paper, they're looking to abolish SIL for just a national infrastructure levy. So I guess I'm saying I'm probably torn on whether there's a lot of benefit, but some authorities have decided that amending their instalment policy, could go some way into help encouraging housing delivery in the district. So, and because it is within our own gift to do that, it could be welcomed by a number of developers. That we're looking favourably to kind of kickstart housing development after the COVID issue or during the COVID pandemic.
And is it with the forms that have been printed online for people to submit requests? Are we able to respond to individual requests, or do we have to change the whole instalment plan?
You must follow your instalment policy as published. There's no discretion to change that, as I don't believe. But if we were to choose to change our instalment policy, that can be updated without formal consultation, and that can be effective immediately as soon as it's published. So we could go through that process, consider what might be more reasonable instalments, and therefore publish that, and it would have be effective immediately. And that may potentially change number of deferral requests we might get in the future, but equally the government's changed the process so payments can be deferred, and assuming that the information submitted matches what's required in the regulations, we must approve that deferral. So there may be limited benefit in updating our instalment policy.
All right, Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to ask, what is the risk really in doing this? Obviously, we would get SIL delivered later than we currently do, but is there any other risks of not getting SIL at the end of a scheme by not asking for it so early in the development?
The current SIL requirements mean that once a development has commenced, that SIL becomes liable, and the payments under which we should receive the SIL payment are set out in the instalment policy, and that can't be changed. if we change the instalment policy and maybe more favourable, we allow a longer period under which for payments to be made, or they could be made in more instalments of smaller chunks, then obviously that will extend the time period under which we will collect the SIL. But I don't believe there's more risk. It's just that it extends the period under which we can collect the payments.
So the current instalment policy, roughly, tell me if you think this is about right, Nicola, the bottom level of any amount less than 50,000 is sort of for about 2 to 3 houses. Is that correct?
Obviously, it depends on the floor space and the area, but yes, it's generally smaller developments.
I'm sort of working on 100 square meters.
Okay.
For the next level, 50 to 300 is sort of talking about developments of 15 houses, I think.
Yeah, it'll certainly be those kind of,
sort of
small to medium type developments.
All right. So, Councillor Prochak, Oliver, what are your contemplations on this?
I think we keep it as it is. I mean, we could actually change it to send a message, but if we've only had one real inquiry.
Sorry, just to clarify, we've had a small number of inquiries, I'd say 5 or less, about whether we're changing our instalment policy, but we've only had one application for a deferral.
Yeah. Councillor Oliver, any thoughts?
Yeah, I just wonder, whether or not there's a benefit of changing it, and that we are where we are on this, and that if we're not being put under any sort of contact from developers to change it for any reason, then why change it?
So we could just keep it under review, really, can't we?
I think so, yeah.
So it seems to me the suggestion here would be that we note the report as requested and just make no change for the time being, but review it based on any further formal requests. Is everyone happy with that?
Yep. Agreed.
Yes, agreed.
Julie, if we could,
that's fine.
If we could take a vote on that, Julie.
Yes, that's fine. So, members, I will call your names out in alphabetical order. So you need to say for, against, or abstain. So, Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Oliver.
For.
Councillor Prochak.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And that takes us back to item 5, which is the Strategic Community Infrastructure Levy Governance Arrangement and Funding Decision Protocol. This is how decisions have been made in the first round and was agreed. So who would be taking this?
That's me again, Chairman.
Good. Okay, go for it. You've got a lot today.
So at its meeting on the 14th of December 2015, Council, along with the adoption of SIL, approved a number of recommendations, one of which was the governance procedure for the spending of income derived from SIL. The current arrangements are shown at Appendix 1. When SIL became effective in Rother on the 4th of April 2016, the charging schedule, Regulation 123 list and instalment policy also became effective. At a Cabinet meeting on the 3rd of December 2018, where it was revealed that the threshold of £250,000 strategic SIL funds had been reached, a report was presented setting out how the Council was now in a position to allocate SIL contributions collected to the infrastructure projects which benefit the Rother District. At the meeting, it was resolved to approve the Council's SIL funding decision protocol, bid pro forma, assessment criteria and bid validation checklist, which are attached to Appendix 2. Paragraphs 6 and 7 of the report set out the process once bids are submitted and the makeup of the current SIL officer group, which determines SIL bidding applications. Paragraphs 9 to 12 of the report set out the procedure for local SIL, and in terms of assessing applications for BEC SIL local SIL, the same process as set out in paragraph 6 is used. The current governance arrangements, along with the funding decision protocol, bid pro forma, assessment criteria and bid validation checklist, were introduced in 2015 and 2018 respectively. Members' views are sought on whether they wish to make any amendments to the procedures, and if so, what kind of changes need to be made so that any new protocols or procedures can be established and included in the recommendations to Cabinet. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much, Scott. Who might like to start on this? I'm happy to start. There it is. I think the fundamental issue with the current process is, as we saw in the previous item, where I'm getting feedback there, where basically the two issues. One, there was no oversight, so the decisions were made entirely by an officer group with no input at all, and actually no sight of what was being decided until after the decisions and contracts were signed. And I think that is a fundamental issue for transparency and governance. But my feeling was, when I saw the process, and both Doug, Oliver and I sat through the Bexhill section, which followed the same process, was that it felt to me more like the community grant scheme. I think we have to look at it in a completely different way, because the way it is at the moment is that the scheme looks at what the decisions basically look at just what's in hand that anyone puts forward at any point in time, and it doesn't really look at the big picture or things coming forward. So it would be very easy to spend significant amount of SIL to then find, a week later, a month later, a year later, that you would have made a different decision because you have a more important project. So I think that is where I find the fundamental difference, that there wasn't a big picture prioritisation, with the exception of maybe one or two items. So I think we need to really review it, and I've got some suggestions we're going to put up in a second, but I really wanted comments from other councillors. Any thoughts? Doug, you were at that first meeting.
Yeah, I think I would identify the fact that where the community grant scheme fitted into this, because I think that there are smaller projects that perhaps we're not getting that we could fund them from a different source, and I think certainly the transparency of decision making should be in line with members, and I think that was something that took me a little bit by surprise, that we didn't have that ability to input.
Councillor Project, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I just want to echo that was it was quite a shock actually, and it shouldn't have been. I know that this was not transparent. It wasn't in public, but also I think initially it was based only on Bexhill, and obviously as portfolio holder for the rural areas, I was quite shocked. But actually that was put right later. And so I'm glad that Battle Health Pathway and Ticehurst Village Centre got some funding for their projects. I think, it's such a difficult area in terms of infrastructure, and we need as a council to be really aware, as you have said, Councillor Vinehall, of long term. We'll be very aware of the calls on our own property, our own infrastructure. So I think it needs a lot more. This is why the 1, 2, 3 list didn't attract me at all, because it actually, I don't think, dealt in detail with our long-term planning. So first of all, I think we need a different way of assessing projects, and we certainly need councillor involvement for transparency and accountability.
Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's right that we talk also about the community grants fund as well, because as we know, and it's in the papers, that this fund is not supported by regular money. We were taking out of reserves every year, and that's something that we can't carry on doing. It would be nice if the SIL fund could replace the community grants fund, but of course all of the community grants that we get would not qualify for what CIL is for. So it's a bit of a predicament, but the Community Grants Fund is one of the very popular parts of what we do at Rotherham, and to take it away would be very difficult. So I think they do need to go hand in hand, but I don't know what the answer is and how we do fund the community grants from revenue, which is what we need to do. But I also agree that I think we need to be having a similar sort of criteria and panel to decide on these grants as well as the community fund. Thank you.
Yeah. So the community grant, there's a paper which is coming up on that, and I think the challenge there are two. One of the reasons that community grants was highlighted was because there was a sort of cap on community grants at 30,000, and the CIL started at 100,000. So there was lots of complaints, but the CIL has a much more restricted use, not the least which is that community grants doesn't just go within the parishes and towns. So it does overlap, and we can get to that specific part when we talk about the community grants at item 7. But what I was going to do is to share a slide here. I'm hoping I can do this. I'm going to try and do this. Hope I get the right one here. Let's have a look. No. Wait a second. Oh. Let me see if that's, hang on, bear with me a second. Not sure I'm doing this right here yet. Hang on. Yes, here we go. Okay. Does that show? Anything showing yet?
Yes, we've got that, Chairman, yes.
Oh, you have. Okay, that's good. It doesn't actually show on my screen. So it should say proposed approach to allocation of strategic portion of CIL. Does it say that?
Yes, it does, yes.
Good. All right. So I put this together to start the discussion on this. And I think this is really the most important part of what perhaps how we take this forward. And I'll go through it one by one. I'm suggesting that the guiding principle approaches to CIL funding should start with that the fund should primarily be used for providing infrastructure improvements to directly offset the impact of adjacent development, but also to improve the overall infrastructure of the district. And then to move on, to take a different approach where we prioritise improvements or long-term maintenance of existing strategic Rotherham District Council owned public realm assets, to prioritise things like high-speed and ultra-fast broadband in towns and villages. We've heard a lot about this over the last months particularly, and in rural areas, prioritising so that we start to get our speeds above the 20 megabytes, prioritise things like traffic calming and speed reduction, and the use of cycles or walking infrastructure in both towns and villages. So that's one area, but it's really this prioritisation to allocate strategic CIL, so the allocation of strategic CIL be applied only to areas with allocated housing sites which generate CIL. And maybe the exception there, this is a starter paper for discussion, maybe the exception there being where we have exception housing sites of 6 or more houses. This would also perhaps incentivise towns, parishes and communities where there is development, and to see that they will actually get something positive in the community as well. To ensure fairness in the allocation of the strategic CIL by separating the strategic fund into the two groups of Bexhill and rural areas. I know Councillor Prochak mentioned this earlier, and there's plenty of money coming from both areas, but there is also quite different infrastructure needs in both areas as well. And to create, do all of this.
Would you like to scroll up your screen because we can only see half of it?
Okay, my apologies. There you go. To create a prioritised long list of projects. And I think this is the guts of the matter, that we need to actually go out to a form of consultation where we ask all those key parties, be it members, officers, infrastructure providers and towns and parishes, to come forward with proposed projects supported, really in the initial stage by a short outline so that they can be considered and prioritise. What are the things that as a district we need to do first, and get done. and then from that produce a final list which can be recommended once the long list has been assessed, and that then becomes the infrastructure delivery program. So Scott Levicar is in the process of figuring out how much money we have that we haven't committed and what we expect to get over the next period of time based on the developments that we know about and what we think we're going to get, but there isn't really a planning application for. So there's quite a bit of work to be done. And once we have that, we'll know how much money we have and when we'll have it, and we can tie that together with the projects that we absolutely need to do, and the ones that we'd like to do. And that's one of the issues at the moment, because we don't really have that analysis of how much money we expect to get. And so I think there are the must-do projects and the would like to or good to do projects, and we have to find that balance, because the current system just looks at literally what somebody puts on the table today. I am suggesting that we only fund projects where we have money received, and I've put in there, for the avoidance of doubt, not to take loans against the authority's reserves or borrowing. And there was a suggestion for one large project, as probably you remember, earlier this year, late last year, which if it had gone ahead, we could be in quite a difficult problem with our reserves. And lastly, for the infrastructure projects in towns and villages where the project is specific to that location, that the town or village part funds a meaningful share of that project, either through their own CIL or through other funding sources, loans they might want to take. Because there are very specific things to towns or parishes, all the towns and parishes, which are CIL fundable, but they are very, very, very specific to that area. They don't have a broader reach. And you might say that some towns and villages, and when I talk towns and villages, I talk about Bexhill as well, have road infrastructure needs, and that affects everybody. And so that would, they may not be, they would be fully CIL funded, where you might find a sporting facility or just a local footpath might be a shared funding. So they're the thoughts that I've sort of put forward as a suggested starting point, and I'm really attracting comment from members and officers too. Would anyone like to make any comments?
Could I just ask a quick question? Maybe I missed it, but now Bexhill's going to get their own town council next year. Will we be putting money aside?
We already.
Yeah.
Oh, we already do. So Bexhill isn't parish, but it does accumulate a fund at 15% because it doesn't have a neighbourhood plan, and that fund is there now and is being accumulated and was looked at earlier this year. But the projects that were put forward were not considered to be worthwhile. So or meet the criteria. Were not worthwhile is not correct. It didn't meet the criteria. So that money is just there waiting, for the appropriate projects to come forward. Yes, Doug.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I think this gives it a structure, which when I first come across the system last year, I thought it was very ad hoc, and it was very sort of I couldn't quite get my head around it, why some applications that were bid for were sanctioned, others not. I think we do need to have a structure. I think that brings it up to a situation where all can see. And I think this is an excellent start to the changes that we feel that we want to bring forward. Is there, when we look at the, I can't remember which number it is, but from a prioritisation, I think this is the dilemma, I know, between the sort of projects that are there, because some of them will have a greater impact than others. So I suppose this will be something down to the discretionary group to be able to make sure that we're bringing forward those that we really need to put in place, as opposed to those sort of the nice to do projects from when there's plenty of money about.
Yes, exactly. I think the thing is to bring together the best list that we can, that we know about, and I think most of us do know a lot of the large projects, and they need to be brought together, compared, understood, determined, broad costings on, and see how they all fit together and how we can time them as well. based on money coming in.
If I could just add it, this creates an inclusiveness, I think, for all parishes that are out there, so that every part of the community have got this overall inclusiveness of being able to be sharing how we want to take things forward.
Yes. Scott, you wanted to
Thank you, Chairman. So just in terms of funding projects going forward, members will hopefully be aware of the Council's infrastructure delivery plan, which was adopted in 2019. There is a link in one of the reports, one of my reports, but it's also on the Council's website. So within the IDP, we do publish, we have set out in the schedule a number of infrastructure projects that could be funded, and so the plan is to, in terms of preparing the infrastructure funding statement, is for that IFS to be informed by the infrastructure delivery plan for this year.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, and we've had some discussions on this beforehand, and you're absolutely right. At this point in time, the next infrastructure delivery report would use precisely what you said, because we're in that sort of transitional period. And by the time we get to next year, when we have to do it, we would have a new list. But I'm sure there will be projects on the current list which will come forward for this list as well. Nicola.
Hi, I just wanted to just really add to what Scott was saying. So the new work that the planning policy team will be undertaking for the new local plan, part of that work will be looking at what infrastructure requirements are needed to fund future development across the district. So things that are set out in the list that you're presenting here on the screen may be covered by some of these things anyway. So part of the work that the planning policy team will be doing in the next few months, and possibly longer than that, we'll be setting out what infrastructure requirements are. So that should help us maybe gauge where those things are across the district and different levels, kind of maybe really potential major infrastructure projects and some smaller ones as well. And I just wanted to add about the infrastructure funding statement, which Scott will be preparing, which will come to that next meeting. That will set out probably at quite a high level for this one, as it's the first one we do, about which projects will or may be funded through SIL in the coming years. That'll be set out, and as Scott has already said, that will be informed at this point by the infrastructure delivery plan. But when we progress the new local plan, we will have to update that infrastructure delivery plan alongside the work that supports the local plan. So I just wanted to add that in.
No, that's fine, and this process will take from that plan the things that need to move forward and add to it the other things, and we'll be able to get an even better understanding of when they should happen as well, based on Scott's very good work that he's currently doing in terms of understanding when we expect, what money we have, when we expect to get what we know is committed, and what we expect to get for projects that we think are or developments that we think are coming forward, but we haven't really got a final date. Scott, you would like to interject?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just on the back of that, as Nicola just said, with regard to the infrastructure delivery plan, there will be some joint working with Hastings Borough Council, where we have a duty to cooperate with them when they're looking to update their infrastructure delivery plan, because obviously there will be some big areas of infrastructure that won't just sit in Rotherham or Hastings, but across both areas.
Yeah, that's fully understandable, and I think part of this is ensuring that we look at all of those areas, but also we look at actually what we need as well. And as Councillor Prochak said initially, unfortunately, the original 1, 2, 3 list was more or less 100% Bexhill focused, which could only be seen as a little unfair. And there is actually plenty of development money within the CIL to fund both Bexhill needed projects needed across boundary, if you like, and those in rural areas. And I think, to make an altogether better Rother. But certainly one of the things that's come forward that we've all become very aware of over the last 6 months is that piece of infrastructure which is called broadband, and how we now take that forward. I don't think when the 1, 2, 3 list was done, people really thought about that terribly much. But clearly there's going to be a lot higher need on that, and we need to figure out how that fits in and how we work with the county council to achieve that, and Openreach as well. Did anyone have any further comments or thoughts? Tim Hickling, did you have any thoughts on this?
Thank you, Chairman. I was just thinking, and I think you've alluded on that with the broadband, that it's not just district-wide infrastructure that we need to look at going forward. One area comes to mind is high-speed rail, particularly about the essentially it's a bit of a game changer really for Hastings and obviously ourselves along that coast from Ashford, and working with the Transport for the South East, it's one of their priorities in trying to deliver. So yeah, there is a number of infrastructure projects that are beyond, if you like, the district boundaries, which have a major impact on us if we can deliver them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and they should be included. As we get that list in, it'll when you get all the projects in, you can see how they all sit together, and it's better to make the decision when you get them in as to how you address them, commit money to them, etc. Councillor Prochak.
Yeah, I mean, high-speed rail beyond district and SIL budgets as well, I would think. Just to ask officers, really, and maybe, I don't know, Scott or Nicola, I don't know. The list you produced, Chairman, is that a good base? Obviously not set in stone, because we haven't had time to really, think about the infrastructure delivery plan with it and all that sort of thing. But is it adequate to actually, if we approve this in principle today, as a document that could go forward to a discussion group to actually either refine it or it?
Well, I think it is exactly that. It's the starting point to give officers the direction that they can start to now fill out the proposed details. And yeah, Councillor Dixon, I didn't miss you, but you put your hand up instead of the thing, so I just
no.
I didn't pick up the hand up.
An hour ago.
Oh,
no, about half an hour ago. Don't worry.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I wasn't.
A couple of questions. Is how do we sit with other people's priorities? So if we're going to do a list of what we think of our priorities, parish councils will clearly have a different list. But more importantly, I think county will have a different set of priorities, and things that we might think are priorities and county don't, that are county functions. How do we influence or change that? And then also, how do we prevent our SIL money being used to fund things that really should be funded from elsewhere or by someone else? And I'm thinking of things like traffic calming, and that should be funded maybe by county out of their normal funding rather than coming and raiding our SIL pot. What you think about that?
I think officers might like to comment on that. My own personal comment is that I think firstly getting all the projects on the table is the first bit in a way that we can really get a clear view, and then we start to make some decisions about precisely what you're talking about. What are the priorities for us? What are the priorities for others? And how do we mix the two together? And there's probably a bit of negotiation in there, particularly when it comes to other authorities, whether it be the county or whatever, because there'll be things that they want to do that perhaps aren't our priority, and things that we want them to do, which isn't their priority. And maybe there's some discussion in between there so that we can achieve as much of both of each other's objectives as possible. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion within this whole mix. Does that help?
Yeah, and what about us funding things that we shouldn't be funding and other people should be?
Well, precisely, and I think we have to say that. I think when we look at where things are, we should make that statement. We should say, no, that's for you to fund or not. I mean, when we get down to one area, which I know is something that you have quite a lot of interest in, is the Blackfriars connection to the station, and that on sort of face value sounds like a project that should be funded out of the Blackfriars SIL, for example. And how much of that should be funded by, is it Southern Rail, or I'm not sure which is a particular part of the Southeastern Rail. So there are those questions, but there might be things that we want to do around the railway that they don't want to do that we might have to take a position on. I think it's very much working each of those things out, and some of them will be complex, and some of them that we want to do, like it might turn out that Southeast Rail says not interested, can't do it. So there might be projects which we would like to do that get stuck because another party won't join up, if you like. So, but at the end of the day, we have to look at what works for us first, and then work from that list, don't we? Nicola, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the comments that you were making there. I was going to say that when we liaise with infrastructure providers, which is what we will need to do as we move forward with the new local plan, when we've got a better idea of what the future development requirements will be, we'll need to work with infrastructure providers to ascertain whether there's critical infrastructure that needs to be provided to go forward to support the level of development that might come forward through the local plan, and we'll liaise with a wide number of infrastructure providers to understand what that is, and part of that will be finding out from them what they are proposing to fund through their own funding streams, whether they be part of their business plan or other types of grants or loans or whatever, which they might be able to tap into to deliver these particular infrastructure requirements. They're all come to us, and we'll understand what these things are, and they'll feed forward through into our infrastructure delivery plan and into future infrastructure funding statements for us to understand what's going to come forward and when, and what might need SIL infrastructure SIL funding going forward, so we get a better understanding, and so we can have an idea of a certain level of development might require some type of infrastructure, and then maybe a higher level of development might require even more infrastructure. And so we understand what those projects are and whether there's funding from any of these other sources. And you're right that a county council might have a different idea of what might be critical in their sense, and we can take a different view, but we won't know until we start having those conversations and getting that information back and feeding into these documents we need to support the local plan. So I just wanted to say that we will ask those questions, and it will be as we progress forward to understand whether we actually agree with what those infrastructure providers are saying.
So Nicola and Tim, how happy are you to take these basic ideas forward, to form them up into to give them a little more body and a bit more process?
I think, Chairman, I'm more than happy to discuss it further with Nicola after, if you can share those list of points you've got in that sheet. I'm sure we can go away and have a discussion and come back.
Yeah, so perhaps we could aim for the next meeting for that to be formed up. If you can, we can have some informal discussions in between time. Councillor Prochak.
The other issue is also the decision-making panel, or whatever we're going to. I mean, it seems to me from our discussion and from what we said earlier is that actually the processes we inherited, none of them are going to survive, I think, in the same form. So did you want a recommendation now about the governance arrangements, or
Yes.
is that going to be a further report?
No.
Because what we've said, and both the leader has said and Councillor Dixon, is that we would like the SIL group to include members. And so do we need another report on that?
Are you asking me, or are you asking officers?
Anybody who knows the answer.
Well, I think the question is who should be on the SIL funding group, which is currently SIL officers, but the new process may not have a funding group as such, but more of a decision-making group. So it'll be a group that looks at all the priorities and comes to hopefully some rational decisions as a starting point. I would have thought, as a start, and it may change over time, that you start with this group plus appropriate officers. Clearly, It's going to have either the finance and planning, and probably Ben Hook's group, because he is quite involved with a lot of the on the development side. Nicola, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think in order for us to bring a further report forward for consideration by this group, bearing in mind that we need to make recommendations to Cabinet on what future outcomes would be, I think my advice was if we can have a steer from the group now, and about who you think should be on a group, assuming that a group is the way forward, and looking at the assessment criteria, whether we want to work those through as well. I think it will need a further report coming forward, but if it is going to cover all those items, I'm not sure we'll necessarily be able to get all of those ready for the November meeting. But I know we do have a further meeting planned beyond November. But it certainly we can start taking the items that are shown in the screen that's on display now. Start working them through, but I think we probably need a bit more discussion either here from the group about what those other things might cover, or whether we have a discussion, something more detailed at the next meeting, and then we work that through for the meeting after.
All right. So in terms of the group, the group will, in some respects, depend on the process that we finally come forward with. So I think if at first point we recommend that Nicola's group take away the starting point and produce for the next meeting a report which gives a little bit more body as to and process it, how it might be actually taken forward, and also an appropriate group to be the call it the assessment group, whatever you want to call it, but that is going to include an appropriate number of members supported by the correct officers. Some of them are clearly obvious in that mix, but we'll leave it to you to put forward recommendations. Is that all right? Are you happy with that?
Yes, that's fine.
Well, on that basis, Julie, would you like to take is there any other questions? Did anyone else have any other comments before we just go to a vote on that? Julie?
Okay, members, so I'll call your names out in alphabetical order, and it will be for, against, or abstain. So Councillor Dixon.
Sorry, Julie, I don't really know what we're voting on here, because we've not actually recommended who should be on the seal funding group. So that's number one.
No, the recommendation has changed, and that is that Nicola will bring forward a worked up paper which takes the proposals that we looked at on screen and gives them a little more body and process. And along with that paper, she will recommend the group, which will be a member voting group supported by officers.
Okay. Well, Nicola did ask. I was just about to try and type in my name. She was going to ask about a steer from members. If you want to steer from me, I think it should be 3 councillors and 4 officers. I don't think you want any more than 7 on a group like that. But that's personally my opinion. Yeah, so I'm happy for a report to come back. Yeah, 4.
Yeah, well, she can take that into the report. Yeah. I suppose it's a little bit like the property investment panel, really. Julie, are you with us?
Yep. Yeah, sorry, Chair. So then Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, 4.
Councillor Oliver.
Yes, 4.
Councillor Trojak. 4. And Councillor Vinehall.
4.
So that's unanimous.
Good. That moves us on to that's probably the meatiest item of the day, because that is really where the changes are taking place, and it will take a little bit of working up to just get the correct process for that. So we move on to item 6, which is the government future review of the community infrastructure levy, and this forms part of the white paper. This forms sort of 1/3 of the white paper, which is a response that Nicola has put together. So do you want to take us through that, Nicola? Just explain the core of it.
Okay, so item 6 sets out an update for members about the SIL position and how potential changes proposed through the planning white paper are set out within that document. So just in terms of there's a little bit of background for the white paper. So the white paper covers what they're calling three particular pillars. So pillar 1 being planning for development, which sets out proposals to streamline the planning process. Pillar 2, which is looking at planning for beautiful and sustainable places, focusing on sustainability and design. And Pillar 3, which looks at improving infrastructure delivery and reforming the developer contributions. The report itself, as presented in the agenda pack, is focusing solely on Pillar 3. So at the moment, there are 2 broad routes for local planning authorities to secure developer contributions through planning obligations and community infrastructure levy. So planning obligations you'll be familiar with, known as Section 106 agreements. They're negotiated with developers on a site-by-site basis, whereas SIL is a fixed charge for qualifying developments. So it's set out as a fixed proportion on development above a particular threshold, and the proposal set out in the white paper look at whether SIL could be extended to capture changes of use through permitted development rights. Also looks about how SIL could be used to deliver affordable housing provision and potentially gives more freedom to local authorities about how they can spend SIL. It sets out in paragraph 4 of the report a slight contradiction to what it sets out in paragraph 7 of the report. But the proposal is that officers write a report which covers pillars 1 and 2 to be signed off by the Chief Executive and the lead member for strategic planning. So covering pillar 3, which we set out our proposed response in this paper, and the other 2 pillars. There is a briefing session for members programmed on the 15th of October to discuss those items in more detail. So just in terms of what the planning white paper is proposing for pillar 3, that consultation begun in early August, and we need to collate our responses and submit them to MHCLG by the 29th of October. As I said, it covers 3 particular pillars, and the one that we're discussing here particularly is long-term structural changes to how SIL will be replaced. So they're proposing to reform the system of planning contributions to abolish SIL and Section 106 agreements, and proposing a national set infrastructure levy to capture land value uplift, proposing that affordable housing delivered on site would be offset against this infrastructure levy, and the levy would be paid at the point of occupation of development rather than when sites commence, which is the current arrangement. And that would leave councils to pay and deliver infrastructure needed up front where it's required in order to get sites away. So in Appendix 1 of the report, we set out question by question response to the individual items. I don't propose to go through those one by one, but I was just going to pick up some of the key points that the Pillar 3 is covering as proposed in the white paper. So government set out that this new approach to developer contributions will be responsive to local needs, be seen as more transparent, consistent and simplified to remove what they see as unnecessary delay and help support competition in the house building industry, and will respond to changes in the market when prices go up relating to developments. Those benefits will equally be shared between the developer and the local community. So the key differences or the issues that you set out within the paper is that the infrastructure levy would be payable on the occupation of dwellings rather than when sites commence. There'd be a threshold by which low value developments would not pay SIL, so seeking to prevent viability issues coming forward. Government see this as providing greater certainty for communities and developers about what contributions are expected alongside development, and it's aimed to increase revenue because they're going to be charging CIL across all land use classes rather than the discretion of the local authority to just apply them to the ones that they feel is specific to the area. The levy should be more responsive, more sensitive to economic downturns, and should allow for the timely delivery of infrastructure. But could be considered a high-risk strategy for local authorities where we have to forward fund infrastructure. They're also proposing some alternative proposals within the paper. So the favoured proposal is that the infrastructure levy is mandatory, taken across the entire country, but they are also proposing an alternative option where it still becomes optional and then it is set by the individual local authorities themselves, but isn't something that that they're promoting at the moment. They are seeking views on whether that alternative proposal is appropriate. So just in terms of the government's key question about whether CIL and Section 106 should be replaced by this consolidated infrastructure levy, we've raised some concerns about whether the benefits that are being promoted are actually as certain as they've been set out within the paper. We're raising concerns about whether there's issues in delivering some on-site and off-site mitigation against what we would normally promote or secure by a Section 106 arrangement. Although I have noted in some of the legal press that whilst they say that Section 106, the 6 arrangements will be taken away, a lot of legal professionals consider that will need to be replaced by some other type of Section 106 equivalent. So whether that will go through as proposed is uncertain. The paper isn't clear particularly about how the national set rates will work practically because there's no information about what the values might be. And as I'm sure you're aware that they differ substantially between Northern and Southern England and London areas. So we do raise some concerns around that proposal. The government also proposed that the infrastructure levy could be extended to allow to capture changes of use through permitted development rights. That is something that doesn't happen at the moment. So where developments can change through the permitted development arrangements, even where changing from office to residential conversions, we don't capture CIL currently. But the proposal set out that arrangement would happen through these proposals, so therefore potentially increasing the levy base under which we would collect. The government proposal set out that under the infrastructure levy, we would be able to raise funds to secure affordable housing through in-kind delivery on site. So we're making it mandatory where we have a specific policy relating to the need for affordable housing or requiring percentages on site. And they believe that will be an incentive for developers because the provision of affordable housing on a particular site would allow them to reduce the amount of infrastructure levy that they bring forward. Although we have raised some concerns about whether that would allow us to secure what we would normally set out to achieve through Section 106 in terms of securing future nomination rights and helping to secure the land, particularly and other things that our housing development team would wish to secure through Section 106. The government also set out an alternative proposal as opposed to the one that they are putting as their favoured approach, allowing first refusal for local authorities for any affordable housing coming forward. So it would be for a registered provider or a local authority if they are a housing authority to buy up affordable housing at a very low rate from particular sites, but the developer therefore has the discretion to set out which units are sold and where they are on the site. So there wouldn't be any discretion for us to choose which units we would require. So we set out in our response that we have a significant unmet need on our housing register. We have concerns about how this might pan out in the future. on-site delivery is critical across the entire district to allow us to have a continuous pipeline of new homes. And we feel that the benefits of the Section 106 system shouldn't be forgotten, particularly as I mentioned earlier about securing future nomination rights. So we raise a query about whether that is practical. The proposals aren't sufficiently clear to allow us to find out how in-kind contributions and offsetting will work in practical terms, and there will need to be further details published by government. But I've set out in the paper quite a detailed response to that, but I'm not going to go through that word for word. Another key element of the proposal, it should give local authorities more discretion about how they spend their CIL. So there's a strong link, as we've already mentioned, where development occurs and where funding is spent. They're not proposing to make any changes in terms of the levy, the 25% for made neighbourhood plan areas. So that is still proposed to be kept, but they're seeking our views on whether increased local authority flexibility to allow us to spend receipts on policy priorities once we've met our core infrastructure obligations. They consider how we might be able to spend the money on parks, open spaces, street trees. They even talk about improving services or reducing council tax. I do wonder whether, looking at what might be our list of infrastructure, whether there would be scope to do that going forward. So I'd just like to reiterate that we are having a meeting on the 15th to discuss all the pillars and how we might respond to the other two set out in the paper. I don't know if there's any particular questions anyone wants to raise or any discussion on any of the items or the responses to the questions as they're set out in the paper.
So thank you very much, Nicola. This is, as everyone gathers, a pretty complicated area. So the actual recommendation here is centred around a question which was raised at the last meeting as to whether we should be reviewing our schedule, our CIL schedule of payments. In other words, what we charge in different areas. And the point that Nicola is making here is that because there's this new consultation coming forward and it looks like something will change, and if CIL gets taken away, then we don't want to spend a lot of money reviewing the schedule, which takes a couple of years and quite an expensive consultant to do if the whole thing's going to change. So the recommendation by officers is not to review that, and I think that is the correct thing that we should be following. And second to that, Nicola has done a very good summary, as best a summary outline as as anyone could do on the changes to the infrastructure levy proposed by the government. So there'd be this sort of single charge with all sorts of other interesting things like developers being able to swap affordable housing for their payment. And that's trying to address the viability issue that anyone on the planning committee has probably seen several times now, where developers can't get out of the infrastructure levy, but they can get out of affordable housing through viability assessments, and clearly the government is trying to address that. And the answer to that is who knows what's going to happen.
Can't hear you, Jonathan.
Chairman, your sound has gone completely. I think he's just trying to get himself back in again.
What were you saying about broadband?
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you now, Chairman.
Sorry about that. For some reason, if I don't talk for a while, my sound goes. But I'll leave you to make some judgments on that. Yeah, so I don't know where I got up to there. It's a very complicated area, quite a technical area. The government is one of the main issues is about viability, where developers do viability assessments to get out of affordable housing. They're putting up the option where you could somehow not pay some of the infrastructure levy, but the point is that the community infrastructure levy stroke section 106s may have a limited life. We don't know if that's going to happen, but at this point in time, and for that reason, there is no point in reviewing the current charging schedule that we have, even though that it may not be perfect, and that it might be a disincentive in some areas. Hastings Fringes is one where we charge a rate on one side of the road and Hastings doesn't charge a rate on the other side of the road. So for the time being, the recommendation by officers is not to review our charging schedule. And so that's the recommendation. Separate to that, and we'll take a vote on that in a minute, unless anyone has any questions, does anyone have any questions on the actual consultation that Nicola went through? I know it's quite complicated. It will be covered off again on the 15th. Anyone? No questions? On that basis, let's take a vote on the recommendation. Julie.
Okay, members, I call your names out in alphabetical order. It's for, against, or abstain. Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Oliver.
For.
Councillor Smojak. For. And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
And that takes us on to the last main item, apart from any other business, which is item 7, and this is about the CIL versus the community grant scheme. So who is going to, we have a redeclaration from Councillor Prochak on this item as well. Who is covering off this item?
That's me, Chairman.
Scott, thank you, Scott, if you could.
Thank you. So this report is to advise members on the differences between CIL and the Council's community grant scheme, which I'm very familiar with, having set the scheme up in 2008. The main difference between CIL and the community grant scheme is the level of funding awarded, which was alluded to earlier, with the community grants up to £30,000, but in 3 different brackets, and strategic CIL above £100,000, and the varying criteria that accompany both funding schemes. Paragraphs 2 to 6 of the report set out the current arrangements for the community grant scheme, and my previous report set out the governance and operating procedures for both the strategic and local CIL. It is apparent that the strategic CIL and the community grants are different and fulfil different funding functions. However, the local CIL is more akin to the local community grant projects, again alluded to earlier, that may potentially overlap with community grants. Views are therefore sought from the CIL strategic group as to whether there should be any amendments to the current Rother community grant scheme to minimise duplication with local CIL. Thank you.
Good. Who would like to start?
Could I just kick off as chair of the panel? It works really well, this, and as you've said, I think Councillor Dixon said it, it's very popular, and it works well because we've got officers support, obviously, but we also have member input from Rother Voluntary Action and Action in Rural Sussex, both very valuable areas to contribute. The applications are very specific for the parishes, towns, and Bexhill. And Bexhill has had a number of grants, and almost the same as the parishes. Well, a little bit higher in one case, but it's for very specific, non-strategic things like sports pitches or village hall tables or a new boiler for the kitchens, and very interesting ones as well, and they're really appreciated. However, at every point, as Councillor Dixon's already pointed out, is that it's not sustainable. It's 130k a year we have, and if you remember last year, we actually overspent, but then COVID came along, which changed the picture. I have been doing a bit of work on getting a company to run a lottery for Rother. How long I'm not quite sure how long it would take to actually build up to 130k a year. But many councils do run lotteries, many successfully. And, you know, maybe the time is right now to actually have a look at this properly and start it off. And that would be my suggestion, that we should have a look at this, bring a report to Cabinet, and just get a Cabinet decision on this.
All right, thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's a very difficult one, this, because the top and bottom of it is we can't afford this. The sustainability of removing £130,000 from reserves each year is just not sustainable and not good financial management. But as we've said before, it's a very popular scheme. Rother is thought of very, very well in the community because of what we do with this. And in the end of the day, £130,000 isn't an awful lot of money in the big scheme of things. So, but the question is, how can we maintain a community grant scheme but pay for it differently? And advice will be sought, I think, because one thing I think of is there is a lot of overlap. Things that are paid for out of the community grant scheme would qualify for SIL money. Is there a possibility of a small pot of SIL money being made available for some of the community grants, which would then reduce the community grant budget down by some amount? I see in the report there's a hint that we should be getting parishes to do this themselves. That will be good for some parishes. There are some parishes that will get very, very rich out of SIL, and there are some parishes that will not receive a penny out of SIL. So it's a bit of a difficult one, that, because that would be a lot of inequality across the district. Apart from that, and apart from a lottery or some other great scheme that someone's going to come up with to raise some money, I don't see the way forward for the community grant scheme. So any ideas, I think, would be welcome.
Doug?
Can I just quickly come back before Doug?
Yes.
Actually, one of the criteria is that it should be match funded, any project. And there used to be a very strict one. It was there had to be the parish council, but of course that didn't work with Bexhill. That parishes are usually asked to support a bid in some way or other. Yep.
Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I agree with Sue on that. Match funding is a way of getting the community involved and buy into it all, and it's not just a handout from local authority. And it is a concern. It comes from reserves. So if there was a way that we could earmark some of our SIL money, community funding, if you like, into our community grant, I just feel that might even have an increased amount to actually spread it further on the smaller projects that touch more and more people. So I would look to support any sort of change on that if it was within the mechanics of the scheme.
Thank you. So I think the tricky bit is that SIL has got a narrower range of things that it can do. Certainly the strategic SIL, whereas community grants can do pretty much anything it wants. The difference is also the amount, the 30,000. Currently, the current SIL start at 100,000. Now, there's no reason why that has to. I mean, if you look at the other authorities, they don't have a minimum level for SIL funding. That was just something that was put in to try to make the community infrastructure only be for big projects. But there's no reason why there aren't very good priority projects that come under infrastructure that are under 100,000. So I think there's all those sort of issues. I think the question is, could there be some small part of the SIL pot which might fund those items that would have come forward as community grants that are actually eligible for SIL funding? So maybe that's the way to look at it. You take some small pot of SIL funding which is made available for things that would have come through community grants but are actually SIL fundable. That might be an approach. What do you think? Any thoughts? No. Nicola, what do you think about this? Or Tim? Or Scott, as you know both systems quite well now.
if I can, Chairman, I think that sounds a sensible approach, really, because there is, as it's been alluded to, there is crossover, and some of the items, like has been alluded to again around sports pitches or pavilions, that could be funded either through community grants or SEAL, could perhaps go into a SEAL pot to fund those areas.
Thank you. And Nicola?
We just need to be really clear that it would be taken from the strategic SIL money, so the flexibility in the current regulations and planning practice guidance are much more strict on what the money could be spent. So we need to be really clear about what the parameters of any SIL from that pot would be. So I just wanted to raise that to make sure that was particularly clear. And we need to also be aware that obviously the local SIL, which will go to the parishes, it is possible that a number of the projects that may come through on the community grant scheme, could be funded by the local SIL as well. So I just wanted to raise that point also.
Yes, thank you. And Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. And I do note that yes, some of this could be pushed back to the parishes, but I don't think that's going to be necessarily popular, and I don't think it would do us a lot of good. I certainly think that they can pay for some of it out of their local SIL, but as I said, not every parish is going to get SIL. There's definitely going to be a have and have-nots out there within the parishes. I don't really want to give Scott more work to do. However, I wonder if maybe an exercise we could push till next time and have a look again is maybe over the last couple of years, the money we've given out in community grants, how much of that would have qualified for the strategic SIL? That would just give us an idea of the wrong tree here. But even in ballpark figures, if we could reduce the community grant scheme down by say 50,000 and have that out of the strategic SIL, that would at least help push the can down the road a bit with the community grant scheme, but it would certainly help. But at some point, someone's going to say we can't do this community grants anymore the way we're doing it. I don't really want to be the cabinet member to do that, to be honest.
Scott, what's your thought on that? Is that something that would be doable to just go back over the last 2 years' grants and see which ones you think would have been self-fundable?
So just to clarify, that's the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Last 2 years, yep.
I mean, there aren't a lot. I don't think there's too long a list of projects, is there?
No, I can certainly work with Amari Kennedy in Ben's team to pull that list together.
But also,
I mean, Scott, it doesn't have to be forensic. It really doesn't. It's just a little tabletop exercise would be fine.
Okay, we do. Yeah.
I mean, I think there has to be a reality. People apply for grants, or parishes and towns do, because they need the money. They don't have enough funding source or whatever. But if they are receiving SIL, then they do have a funding source, and perhaps you just have to take an approach on that. Councillor Prochak.
Thank you, Chairman. I just didn't want to lose sight too much of the work that we've done already on the lottery idea. This is Scott. You could breathe a sigh of relief. I don't think it's you that's going to have to do this, but actually, a report would be very easy to bring forward to Cabinet on how to do a lot. It's a company. They've found a company that actually do all the hard work for you. Don't have to actually have officer time involved in it. Obviously, they take a percentage, and it's the one I found which took the lowest percentage. The pound ticket type lottery where the top prize was 25,000, and then you go down the numbers, how many numbers you get right, and so if you get 2 numbers right, you get another free ticket. It's that kind of lottery. It's run really well in Bournemouth or lots of other authorities. So I think it's something for the community grants officers to look at and bring forward. And so I hope that's okay with everybody.
So would we like to, the recommendation was that our views be sought, and I think the summary of views is that one, for Scott to do a top line assessment of the last 2 years worth of community grants and see which ones might have been fulfilled by CIL, and that is really top line. We don't want you spending vast amounts of time on it. It's really just to get a good idea. For it's a sort of a crossover recommendation, really, whether it's the community grants group look at the lottery that Councillor Prochak has already looked at and done some work on, and that forms a starting point to see whether we should perhaps commit to an element of the strategic fund which might fulfil some of those projects in the future or not. And clearly we have to deal with the issue of the fact that some parishes don't have community infrastructure levy. Yes, Councillor Dixon.
Can we get in the recommendation that we acknowledge that the community grants scheme as it stands is unsustainable and we need to make a change? Because I really like to get that message out to other councillors that think that this is sort of it comes from the magic money tree, and you know, one day Robin will say we can't do this anymore, and we need to be in a better position before we can get to that stage.
I see no reason why we wouldn't include that as a note in the recommendation. I think it's important to put down the marker on that. So is everyone happy with those points? Is there any comments from officers on that? Tim, you mentioned in the chat that seemed reasonable.
Yes, Chairman. I think Councillor Dixon suggested that we have a look at headlines effectively of the spend in the community grants of the last 2 years is very reasonable. I think we can go away with that and report back to November.
Okay. If we're all happy with those points that I just made, Julie, would you just like to take a vote on that? Do we need a vote on that?
Yes, we do, Chairman, yes. So again, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. For, against or abstain. Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Oliver.
For.
Councillor Prochak. For. And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
So the last item was any other business. Did anyone have any other business on this? Yes, Prochak.
Just to introduce, I mean, it's interesting, the discussion about the community grants, because we could actually, as a council, decide to focus our spending, our efforts, say, all in one particular area. Maybe we would want to say, well, our community grants this year have all got to be to do with climate emergency. It's just sort of some thinking that perhaps we can think about more broadly about what we're trying to achieve. Not to say that we're not doing the right thing with the community grants, but it may be an opportunity to think of other ways of achieving what we want to achieve.
Yes, I'd concur with that. I'd concur with that. Do officers have any other comments that they'd like to make or business raise? I know that Councillor Dixon, while you make one, Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. Really a question for Councillor Prochak. We've got an opportunity with the rural conference that you're arranging coming up soon. Maybe a discussion about the local SIL and community grants and the direction that we might have to go in might be an early marker for the parishes to think about that SIL isn't just free windfall money. Actually, there's a reason for it and a need for it to be spent in the right way and in conjunction with partners. So I don't know if it's too late maybe to get something done on that.
I think, I think you're absolutely right. And I think Scott earlier today emailed a list in response to a question on how much various parishes have now, and the amounts that the money is mounting up. I mean, Battle has £52,000, Catsfield £26,000, Breed £16,000, and Breed doesn't have any allocated housing. That's windfall housing that's occurred there.
Declare an interest, Chairman.
Sorry? Oh,
don't mention Breed again, please.
Sorry about that. My apologies. Well, I shouldn't mention Settlescombe in that case. I have to declare an interest, but they are really just reporting the amounts of money. So in total, the parishes that have received in total just under £163,000. So it's a substantial amount of money that a lot of good work can be done with in terms of local infrastructure. I'm not questioning a previous decision, but with 52,000, say, in Battle, you might have been asking whether the strategic fund going to the health path was the correct decision. I'm not saying it's the wrong decision or not, but when there is quite a lot of money in that local funding, we start to have to have those thoughts and think through. So I know today's, yes, Councillor Dixon, you're going to criticise me for saying that, aren't you?
Not at all. I do know that Battle did give some of their local seal to that anyway.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's good. That's the right attitude. Yeah.
Maybe Nicola could update us, because I know she gets the returns from the parishes about their spending intentions. I know you mentioned Breed, and Breed have put theirs aside for a new community hall, so they've got plans for it. But I wonder if you could maybe quickly mention whether there are parishes that have plans, or whether they're just sitting on money that they're not really quite sure what to do with.
Nicola, did you want to update on the reports that you received?
Okay, so we last made the request in 2019 for the bids or the reports from the various parishes. I think we approached 9 and we got 6 reports back. I don't know without looking for them, but I can certainly get back to your report at the next meeting. I think perhaps only one of the parishes had indicated that they'd spent anything. The others were keeping, hadn't had the opportunity to spend the money at the time. We will ask the parishes that have received money in 2019-20 to submit a further report at the end of this year. So we'll be having an update from them in December anyway. And if they don't submit to us for us to display on our website, they must display on their own website. So there is a requirement for them to do that, but we will be chasing them at the end of the year to publish their report.
Kevin? You want to reply?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, maybe, and this is just a bit of I'll throw the comment out there for Tim or Nicola, that maybe then maybe a SIL workshop for the parishes might be a good idea in the future. How to spend your SIL, how to account for it, and how to make sure you don't have to send it back. I don't know if that is a problem, or maybe just a perceived problem.
Well, as per the regulations, if a parish hasn't spent it within 5 years, it is actually reclaimable. I don't think that there's any plan or suggestion that would happen. And I suspect if you have a plan but haven't spent it, then it's probably not really a good idea to ask for it back. That facility exists. I don't think has ever been a plan to do that. Am I correct in that, Nicola?
You are correct.
Yeah, thank you.
I would say that not every parish is as well run as Settlescombe.
Well, we haven't spent ours. We're saving it up for traffic calming, and unfortunately that takes a couple of years just to get going. So there is a real reason why they don't. Often it's just being banked until a parish can afford something. Well, look, I think this has been a good discussion today. I recognise this is a very technical area, and sometimes can be a little dry, and we are trying to sort of move how we use CIL on, and that's going to take just a little bit of work. But I think today we've sort of started the process, and that's good. And so hopefully the next meeting we will start to fill out and work as to how we're going to bring forward those priority plans. I think Councillor Oliver, you have a comment to make.
Yes, on the summing up, thank you, Jonathan. For me, it's been an excellent report, and thanks Tim's team, Scott and Nicola. I think disappointing there's not more members, because I think it touches every part of the district. But no, I found it very, very useful, very informative, and thank you very much for the difficult questions that you've fielded, Nicola and Scott. Thank you very much indeed. Good report.
And perhaps finally, just welcome to Scott, because he's moved into an area which, as you say, is quite complicated, and clearly he's got his head around it. Very good.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott. I really appreciate it. We're looking forward to the various things you're going to bring forward. So thank you very much for that. I should note that Councillor Cook and Councillor Meir did join the meeting during the meeting. That should be noted. On that basis, thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll see everyone again tonight at the Cabinet meeting.